Okay, let's get started on our last about half an hour, I guess, not too long here. And we have another reception. I'm not sure if they're putting up the food out there, or if it's raining or what, but okay, great, outside again at that point. And we'll do a quick description of the lecture and then how to get there when we're done with this as well. It's on campus at CU. So I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, maybe to get started on the last session here, or do you want me to say anything?
Yeah, is everybody in? I can see other people outside still. Other people still outside. Thank you. Thank you. Well, this is totally unplanned and unpremeditated. It's not quite unpremeditated because really we've gone back to where we started from yesterday. There is my vision of where we go next. I threw that out as saying we are now at a crossroads. We've got to do something. We're going to make things happen. And there was my own particular little set of things. The third one down was a reminder, not actually what we're going to do, but it's numbers 1, 2, and 4 there. The guidelines, the book, and the workshops, which I saw before this meeting as ways in which we can make things happen. And even within the last hour, some of those have advanced a bit further, insofar as what we see can be ways of making things happen within CoData, the task group, is to set up subcommittees, if you like, or possibly working groups. One on metadata, perhaps, one on facilities, and what Chris was talking about, in which those particular people commandeer their own little subgroups of people, so they will work together and produce their own guidelines, recommendations, and will then report back to us, who will then report to CoData. So it's a way of getting the community of the CoData group to work individually and then collectively. A third thing to do, which we can all consider, is whether we as a task group can take on board some specific study, maybe a very general one like world hydrology. How do our different types of data sets impinge on the way in which there is a collective global knowledge about the water in the world? And this then would affect almost every type of science and social science that we can think of. To orchestrate that kind of study, we would need, I think, a researcher, a qualified researcher at the helm, such as a data share fellow or a foundation, some kind of foundation, a research fellow at the helm to run it. That's just another type of thinking. But I want to, first of all, to encourage volunteers who are going to help us with these guidelines. The guidelines are a deliverable we really are committed to. We've got tons of material now, somewhere in Google Docs, which we can access later. But we also need people to form a team who are going to be responsible for that. I suggested one person per theme. There were 6 identified themes, but that's not necessarily binding. But if people will come forward and volunteer, it's much more pleasant than us having to say you, you, and you. So to avoid us having to do that, and possibly the fingers pointing at you yourself, would you like to come forward? Would you volunteer? Can we look for volunteers? And by the end of dinner tonight, can we have those 6 volunteers? Secondly, the book itself will want authors to write case studies and help be responsible for putting that book together. Again, we would look, they're not necessary for today to be named, we would look for a team of editors or co-authors for that book. So these are ways in which I think we need to go forward, because I'm going to report on Sunday to the CoData General Meeting. It is my duty as the chair of this task group to plug the case for renewal of the task group. Task group lasts for 2 years. It's a rather short time turnover, but then we have to make the case for being renewed. If we are renewed, we stand a very strong chance of gaining a possibility of about 4,000 or maybe 5,000 euros per year, which can be used for paying somebody to run a website or something like that, as well as travel. If we don't get it, we do not get that money. And that money has been useful to us in the past. So I would like to be able to say we have set up these guidelines, we're going to do it, and we have named a team of editors to run it. That I think is important, and I want to tell the truth, to say, yes, we've done it, rather than say, well, we have done it, but we haven't actually done it. So I would like your support for that. But now we brought here the co-organisers, and I'm sure they also will have some input as to where we're going next and how we can do it. So I said this is totally unpremeditated. It's over to you.
I'd actually like to turn it around, if you don't mind, and ask what you see going forward. We had a bit of felt like a support group a little bit at the end of the last discussion, where we went around the room and asked if we were inspired or depressed, and mix of both. I think it was generally inspired by the great things that we saw, and depressed by the huge scale of the challenge in some sense in different places. But I think I'd like to turn it around and sort of say, how do you see either going towards these objectives or the goals of the concept in general?
Ideas of what you wanted to see come out of this library?
I'm not sure you're going to want to hear what I was. My sense is that, at least from what I've heard so far, the objectives are too broad. That if this task group is going to move forward, you're really going to want to constrain, or at least better define, what you're working on and where you're going. Because it seemed like we were in a lot of different places, but I'm usually a minority view in every meeting I go to. So
What do we get rid of? What do we not do? What do we focus on?
well, I sort of saw it as a data rescue workshop where the idea was to come up with a procedure to identify data sets that were at risk, and then on how one might go about moving those forward or rescuing them. What the issues are, try to do that in a general sense. But I mean, I'm doing all this right up, I'm pulling it right out of the butt right now. I haven't given this any thought, so you just pointed at me, and so I felt I should do something. But anyway, that's I would try to focus more on identifying the data sets that are at risk, and then how to go about rescuing them.
That is actually one of our named foci that I didn't mention. Steve Diggs is in helping do
Right.
that.
What were the other ones?
The metadata, to focus on metadata, and to focus on what Chris was talking about, the preservation of facilities, or actually means of recording data.
So when you talk about metadata, it seemed that on the metadata thing, we sort of bled away from metadata associated with the actual rescue, trying to rescue the data. It became a much broader discussion.
Well, the lady behind you, lady for that is just behind you, so.
So I've been working with Elizabeth before in this group, and then I took a little step back for a while, and everyone else in the group too. And I don't know, I feel very energized by this meeting. I also feel exhausted because some of the discussions have been really intense. In our last the last session I was in, it was a bit spirited. There were people disagreeing, which I really like, because not in a bad way. We need to have multiple views. I mean, a lot of us are coming at this from different angles. So I think that it's hard to hone in on real specifics in some of the areas, and that you have not necessarily cherry-picked, but actually painted some important brush strokes in key areas, and that the next step is, it can't be one committee chair doing it all. the next step is for people to step up to the plate and try to form task groups and things like that. So I already did have a little side chat with Elizabeth, and I'm very passionate about metadata, and I would be delighted, thrilled, excited to work with other people to kind of move the metadata aspect forward. But yes, it is broad, and yes, I'm interested in both metadata to help with data rescue, but metadata as a form of data as well that needs to be rescued. And I'd like to see a task group address those two, because I think they're actually part of, there's a continuum, and they both need to be addressed somehow in concert. And I guess that's what I have to say right now. But the other topics and recommending guidelines and so forth, and getting people to submit for this data rescue award, I think it's all good. So I'm an optimist, even though this topic is overwhelming. I'd be happy to hear from anybody on this. Otherwise, I'll be muscling people. No, I don't want to have to do that. It would be really good to know that there might be other people interested in working on some of the metadata issues and challenges. So, anybody in this room by any chance? No?
Everybody who's at this meeting is now part of something, so you're all dragged in whether you like it or
Well,
not.
I mean, but the reality is...
We have
that-
your name, we know your phone numbers,
But-
we know
but-
where you live, yeah.
But the reality is that we all have regular day jobs, and then you go back and you can only be on so many committees and do things. So we've had the problem before is everyone says yes, and they sign up on the working group or the task group, and then they never show up at meetings and they don't do stuff. And I don't think that's that's not a good way to start out. So, you know, I'd rather actually people not say anything now and think about it and then say, you know what, I want to do it. Then say right now, yes, I want to do it, and then, you know, I'm emailing you 100 times, and then I realize, you know what, they just have too much going on, or their boss is not supportive or something. So we'll make sure that people can find each other after this, because like you said, we already have everyone's names.
Yeah, that's a point I wanted to
Yeah.
expand on too.
So anyhow, collectively, individually, anonymously, no, whatever, I'd be happy to hear from anybody about metadata stuff. So,
I think by necessity, if you have to be broad in order to find out what are the unique interests or common interests of other people. And I mean, from baking tapes to the data rescue awards, all these kinds of things, you know, a couple of them struck a chord with me personally, and I'm sure you folks as well. And we talked about in our most recent breakout the nature of the serendipitous activities that somehow led to the rescue of a project because somebody was interested in this, and from a meeting like this, found out that this other person could help them or held the data. And so the connections, you know, that follow on are really a key. And so I totally agree with, you know, what we thought about doing is adding an area of discipline and area of science domain and interest to our evaluation form to try to help people connect. And of course, I'm sure you've written down contact information as well. But this is kind of the building of a community, and where it goes from there is really hard to predict. But the serendipitous nature of things is, you know, you kind of have to start out broad in order to find out what common interests what person has.
Well, on that tack then, especially of keeping in touch with people, may we assume that the people in this room would like to be considered members of the task group? It costs nothing, it involves nothing, it commits you to nothing, but it keeps you in touch, because then your name will be on a database, and whenever there is a circular from somebody who says, we've got a report due, can you please help? Have you done anything? Or can you help on this? Then you will get that email. We did, and we still have, a format in which we have core members who are expected to reply whenever there is a question about something that needs to be decided, and the corresponding members who may, of course, respond, but who are not necessarily expected to, because waiting for a consensus when you've got about 45 members can just take forever. But if you've got 6 people, at least you can yammer at them and say, please, we need to have your decision by tomorrow. And so that's the scheme we had, and I'm willing to do that again, that if you don't want to be a member, say so. But I think it looks good from the point of view of us vis-à-vis co-data. But also it means that if you yourself are trying to apply for funds, you can say you're a member of this task group, and the task group, being a member of co-data, sets it on a platform. It gives it a label. It gives it a home. Even though it may not be a very well-known one or a very effective one, it is nevertheless better than saying, oh, we're just a nebulous interest group. We are a co-data work task group, and it is a label, and it's useful. So if you want to be a core member, and I hope some of you will, just let me know, and I'll simply change the list. That's all. That's all that's to it. But I hope that everybody would like to be. If for any reason you don't want to be, then just say so, and that's all there is to it.
A quick functional comment on that point. It's been a few comments that I've heard about people wanting to get lists of who's here and sort of contact information. And so what we can do is send out as much as accurate as we have information about who's here and where you are and contact information. And so maybe at that point we can do what Elizabeth suggests, which is if you are or are not interested in being part of further discussion, you can let us know at that point.
So having heard Peter say that the mission is too broad, and as a complete newcomer to this group, I thought I might just mention the elephant that seemed to be in every room that I've been in this week, which is that that data rescue is always the poor cousin. There's no resources put aside for it, and there are very few people in this room who are prepared to say, yep, that's rubbish, we can let it go. We're going to try and save it all. But I haven't seen any conversations, and maybe these conversations happened last year when I wasn't here, about what we might do to change the structural situation that we find ourselves in, that funders, that institutions, that publishers aren't requiring researchers to make their data public. They aren't rewarding researchers for making their data public. Is there a way that we as a task group can start putting a message to the people who actually have some power in this situation about the value of this? Is that the sort of thing this group should be engaged in? It's obviously far too late in the week to sort of raise that now, but maybe at a future workshop that's a topic that might come up, or maybe you've all addressed it all and moved on.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, answer her first.
I had what I would call 4 epiphanies out of this thing as being a moderator. It was actually kind of fascinating to sit in these things and try to play the little bit of the devil's advocate whilst just to make an interesting discussion, but also to see what came out. And the 4 that struck in my mind, these are in no particular order, was the first one was flipping data rescue on its head. Instead of asking, what do we want to rescue, let's put a bounty on what people actually want. In other words, I've heard people say, gee, I'd like this sort of data set. Does anybody know does it exist? I need it in this place at this time. And start putting those kind of lists together, and then people would actually start to go out and go look and see if they could find the data. As it is now, it's kind of I found this data, it looks kind of interesting, let's see what I can do with it. Maybe that's the wrong way to go about it, but the idea of putting some sort of a bounty, and maybe that's a way to get funding. If we could say, look, here's $25,000. Go out and see if you can find that. If you find something, it turns into a grant. You go out and show us what you could come up with, and we start going forward, and that could blossom quite quickly. The second thing for me that I hadn't really thought about was, is it worth really throwing anything away? And the answer is fundamentally, no, it's not. That was kind of a shock to me just to really think about. If you heard about the state of California trying to get the illegal immigrants off the rolls and how much it cost to do that versus what it would have cost just to leave them on the roll, it cost $137 million to try and get them off the roll. It only cost $40 million to leave them on the roll. Going through a data deascension process in NSIDC has been a painful and arduous process. We could have kept the data for a century for cheaper than what it took to get rid of it. The only data we should be getting rid of is the massively redundant data. Okay, how many pictures of Justin Bieber do we really need in this world? Can we, how many times is that same image out there? Can we please get rid of a few of them? Okay. all the old data in the world. Epiphany 3 was all the old data in the world is just noise relative to the influx of new data that's coming in every day. So this is a, you know, we don't need to get too upset about how big is this going to be or how much of a problem is it going to be to capture it because of the size of it or anything else. It's tiny compared to what's out there now. So if we can recover it, let's do it. You know, get after it because the size of it is of no consequence. And then the other, finally, one was the idea that there were funders, potential funders, people who could work on doing this recovery, the schools, the autistic, some of the other talks that came out, and those of us who are the rescuers, that we might be a mechanism to pull those together. So I'd propose that we actually look at a website that actually starts putting up, what's the data sets? Hey, I found this thing, it's really cool. And here's the bounties of this is what I'd really like to find. The marketplace, let's build a co-data marketplace and says, here's the data I've got, here's the data I want. Have you found it? Did anybody see anything like this? I might have some money to help you if you know where it is. And get those also, those funders and those resources and the rescuers. Who are the list of those guys? Who's got experience doing this kind of thing? Who are the master tape bakers? You know, these kind of things. Get that all on a page. I think that would be an incredible, just a resource page in of itself would be an enormous start. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I think it might be useful if CoData created some kind of community space where for this task force where people can easily share the information. I'm not sure what the structure of the handbook is, if it's a sort of static thing or a living document, but we've heard a lot of case studies here and they're going to continue to come up. So it would be great to have a space where people could share that kind of information quickly and easily. The recipe that Mary had, how are we going to share that kind of information. Also to have some sort of, I don't want to call it a registry, but a way of sharing successful funding applications for data at risk so that other people can take some of the keywords out of that and try and put in their own funding application, look at what worked, what didn't, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a web page, and we do have a wiki, but CoData also can operate a wiki for us.
Yeah.
Is that permanent enough, and is it broad enough in access? If it's only for
is there a
task
way
group?
that people can sort of quickly and easily put stuff up there?
Yes,
okay,
I think that's probably the solution that we would offer.
Yeah.
Or suggest. Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
great.
So I've heard from quite a few people today, I hadn't thought about this, that, or other legal issue. I think we should have a legal subgroup, and I'm more than happy to do that work and to lead that, but I'm not a scientist. I'm going to need scientists to join me in this to make sure that it accurately reflects your needs, your wants, the legal questions that you guys would actually have in these efforts. So I'm wondering if there's any appetite for that. Thanks very much.
Come on, you guys, we got something out there. You certainly were yakking a few minutes ago, so yeah.
Okay, I'm a kind of new member. It was the first time for me. I've seen here a lot of themes and niche competencies that I was wondering, as ESA, we are working with the European Space Agency together in the long-term preservation working group, and there we have the opportunity to raise discussion and even to start pilot project on specific activities. So maybe through CoData, I could try to have pilot project on digitalizing technologies, on niche thema that you need to solve, and that I can try to carry forward with all the other agency, eventually even piloting things together. So this is something that can be easily done. The agency is also working in TIOS together with all the the International Space Agency. So even in this working group, we could bring themes, discussion, anything that you would need to raise at International Space Agency, Libya, because at the end, the technologies that we're going to use, the metadata issue that we're going to solve, the technology to digitalize the data that we are going to use are the same for everybody. It's not that it's changing because I'm a space agency and the other one is working on in situ data. So this is something that I can bring easily. And I would love to have the endorsement of the group, because if I can go to the LTDP working group and say, this issue metadata, this issue digitalizing technology, this issue OCRs is for interest for all the world, I think they will endorse the activity for sure. I don't know if it brings something.
Well, when we started off, we were a group of about 16 people, of whom about 10 were active in scientific research. And we deliberately limited the scope of what we could tackle to those sciences of which our members had expertise. And that was sensible, but limited, obviously. And then other meetings with social scientists brought home the very obvious fact that we all shared a very strong commonality, regardless of the actual domain in question. So I think the answer probably is yes, we can be as broad as people want it to be, provided we are still looking at these same topics that are common to us all.
Is this okay? Okay. What comes to mind are ship data. When you look at the ship log, you get sea reports, you get wind, direction, speed, and barometric pressure, and all this other stuff. But also you get manifests, you get crew names, you get disciplinary actions, you get a lot of non-meteorological or hydrologic data in there. And so this runs across a number of disciplines, not only scientific, but also social and history. And I think that when we're starting to rescue some of the data for scientific purposes, we need to tap into the social folks or the history folks saying, look at this great data that we have, put a few farthings on our plate and we'll send it over to you.
Two minutes, last call for comments.
One of the universal, or several of the universal topics that we've covered is looking at what we're going to do with data that we feel compelled for whatever reason to give up, whether it's organizational policy or the end of our life experience with this data as a custodian, and adding that to that data at risk inventory, that I have data that's been digitized and it's accessible, but I have to let it go. And then a follow-on is how to fund what we're doing going forward. I mean, we had a great conversation about utilizing citizen science in several of the different proposals, and understanding what that really can mean to you in finding additional funding that will match dollar for dollar what these citizen science groups will do for you. And looking at the national workshops going forward and looking at funding and sponsors and the imperative that we have as an organization to have an institute of an education of school that will sponsor us in order for funding to be more easily worked on. Either that or working on developing a nonprofit organization of data at risk, a consortium which would include all of us in order to help facilitate everything that we want to do and to get it funded and then get matching funds from other organizations to start achieving all of these wonderful goals going forward.
Thanks, Carmen. And I think one way forward for that is for us to attract patrons to this operation. We do know that there are people in the public, not necessarily in the agencies, who are very supportive of what we're doing and surprised, shocked even, that we aren't already doing, that the science is letting these data just rot. So if we can have proposals of names, we can approach people and say, are you interested in being a kind of uncle for us? And those people may have deep pockets, they may know people who have deep pockets. And if we can then attract something like our own funding for something like 25,000 so that we ourselves can hold another workshop without then having to grovel to other organisations to fund that. We know we've got that resource. I think that would be very powerful. And also we can then help the contacts with schools, maybe through our co-data budget. And so thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good place to stop. So maybe we can bring the session to a close. I'd like to do a few acknowledgments. First of all, you can look at your badge. Thanks to all the funders of this program, CoData, Research Data Alliance, Elsevier, and Sloan Foundation. Without those groups, obviously, we wouldn't be here. Yes, thank you to our sponsors. Yeah. Locally, I'd like to thank UCAR. Most of them can't hear us, but Tyler, our audio-visual guy, probably can hear us, and he's done a great job with all of your technology and plugins and the things. So I'd like to thank Tyler. He's listening in. And then I'd like to thank Elizabeth for being the energy behind all of this and really getting us all together. All right. Okay, so one final thing. I'm going to ask David to do a quick tour of the University of Colorado campus for those who don't know it, and where we can maybe park for how to get there.
Don't know where we are. We're on, what's the main drag right here? Valmont, yes. You're going to take Valmont to Arapahoe. So go due west toward the mountains. Foothills this time of day. You're better off. Okay. 28th. I'm going to go right down Valmont to 30th and 30th over. Yeah. So take Valmont to 30th. And Valmont to 30th and 30th to Colorado, which is right here. So that crosses, so 28th is right about the fold, or it's right about this line right here. So you're going to come down, you're over here at NCAR, you're going to go Valmont, 30th, take 30th to Colorado right up here, and you're going to want to park right where Colorado kind of starts to bend. It turns into 18th Street, and park somewhere along this street, I would recommend. Any place you cannot park in the Euclid parking structure because they're putting a new building on top of it.
You can still park in there through till the end of October, so it's still open.
You can still get in there?
Yeah.
Okay, I went by there and they had it closed. I couldn't get in. But the only thing is they still charge you money to park there.
Yes, they do.
So park on the street. You don't have to pay anything because every place else is free parking. So I'd recommend you're then going to. There's a sidewalk right here that goes right between the Atlas building, which has a strange-looking glass tower on the top of it. So when you see that strange-looking glass tower, you know you're close. It's a very modern-looking building. There's a sidewalk that goes right between it right here, and this bridge structure right here between chemistry and the Eckley building. These two buildings is Ceres, and on the third floor of that building, I've got to run over there and make sure the door is open. And on the third floor of that building is the auditorium. So that's where you're going.
So I think, so we have a reception now. I was thinking 6:30? Maybe we should do 6:15 just to be safe. Okay, so I've heard 3 different times. So I think Sarah's right that for shuttle folks, we should start getting organized at 6, just to make sure everyone's there. And then if you need to go to the hotel first, or are extremely tired because you're from Europe or the other side of the world, and when you need to get some sleep, the shuttles will stop at the hotel first. So for shuttles, they'll start getting organized at about 6. Can you find the
I don't go here, yeah.
which I was going to say which picture should look like?
You just roll past. No, that's not it. That's MSIC. Okay.
Not the same one. All right. Well, here's a close-up view of the.
So you're going to a building that's going to be labeled as series. And it's a bridge. It's the only bridge building you're going to see. So there's actually a 3rd floor goes across as a bridge. When you get there, go under the bridge and in that door and up 3 flights of stairs. It's going to be on the north side. And the staircase is red. If you don't see a red staircase, you're in the wrong place. The former director of series was Swiss and made it the Swiss consulate. So he made all the stairs painted red. So we still have red stairs.
So for reference, on the big map, the corner that Dave was showing, oops, sorry, this one here,
Sorry.
is this corner right here. And as you can see right on the corner is Norland Library. So if you see signs for library, you're very, very close. That's the corner of where the Colorado turns to 18th. You have to go around that corner, so you should see it. And it's right next to that. Clear enough?
If you get lost, find one of us, and then we'll tell you how to get there.
We'll be walking around. All right. So let's go get some food.
Thank you all very much indeed for coming. You've been a super input.